Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ivy if you are new here, and today we are doing part 2 of Orcas in Captivity. This one is probably going to be longer than part 1, and it is a little bit more all over the place just because there's so many different things that I want to touch on and then I want to talk about, and so many different stories, and I wish I could go into depth about every one of them, but we would literally be here all day. We are going to start this video by talking about SeaWorld's breeding program. Now, I will say, when I was doing research for this and when I was reading about it, it's very disturbing. At least to me it is. I find it disturbing, I find it uncomfortable. So if you are a person who finds this kind of topic uncomfortable, you don't like talking about it, skip ahead, don't watch the video, whatever you need to do. I'm just warning you. I think it's very, very disturbing, so there, you've been warned. So basically in the 1970s, SeaWorld decided they weren't going to take orcas from the wild anymore just because there was so much controversy and drama and public outcry about it. They originally started doing natural conception with the whales. Now, they knew that this was just a temporary solution to get new whales because this was eventually going to create a problem of interbreeding, and obviously they did not want that. So they needed to find a way to increase their gene pool, and they basically decided that the cheapest way to do this was artificial insemination. Now, just because this is the cheapest way does not mean that it was the easiest. It was actually really, really hard, and it took a female 6 months to prep for the procedure of insemination. The female has to be completely upside down on their backs, which isn't completely unnatural for these animals, but to stay in that position for a long time definitely would not happen in the wild. And it means that their blowhole is completely submerged in water. So it's not a comfortable position. It's definitely not something that they would do for an extensive period of time. They had to be able to do this for up to 10 minutes. So it definitely took a long time to train the whale to be able to be in that position and cooperate for that period of time. They also had to get the females used to the trainers touching them and blowing air into their cervix, because that's what opened them up to be able to conceive the embryo. In John Hargrove's book, Beneath the Surface, he talks about this pretty graphically, specifically when he was on the team to train Kasaka for this. Now, he said that Kasaka always closed her eyes during the procedure, like she had to sneer in pain. They always had to have her daughter Takara in a nearby pool or she would just not be calm enough to cooperate. And obviously these are big animals. If they don't cooperate, if they start thrashing in a little med pool with all of these trainers and a vet they're not familiar with, it ain't gonna be good. But when the time for the procedure came around, they were planned out to the T, to the exact minute that the hormone level showed that she was going to ovulate, because the sperm wasn't very easy to get either, so they wanted to make sure that each one of these procedures was going to guarantee them a calf. Now, for males, it was a little bit different. Basically, what they would have to do is put whatever male they were trying to teach this to in a pool by themselves near another whale that would get them aroused. And they basically had to somehow teach this whale to ejaculate without any contact with anything, just by themselves in the water into a bucket. Now, the reason why this was so hard is because the whales just basically had to guess what the trainers wanted them to do. So it kind of took a special whale to be able to figure out what, they wanted from them. And only 2 or 3 whales were ever successful in this. Even if they could figure out the correct procedure, a lot of the times they would get water into it, which completely contaminates it, and they can't use it at all if there's water in it. So this was definitely a pretty hard procedure too, and obviously Tilikum was one of the whales who did this pretty well. And now over 50% of SeaWorld's orca population has Tilikum's DNA. Now, let that sink in a little bit. you would not breed a aggressive bulldog with another bulldog because you would not want aggressive puppies. You would not want to keep growing that trait into those animals. But SeaWorld's gonna breed 50% of their population with an aggressive whale who's killed 3 different people. Like, what were they thinking? After Dawn Brancho's death in 2010, SeaWorld trainers were instructed to get all females that could possibly carry a successful pregnancy ready for this procedure, because they knew that the death of this trainer was going to kind of be like the match that was going to light the fire for all of these laws that animal activists were going to try to get changed. So they wanted to make sure that they were going to have as many whales once this was all over as they could. So they were just getting all the available female whales pregnant as they could, and when they would miscarry, they would just get them pregnant again, which is extremely unhealthy and extremely unnatural for these whales. But unfortunately, artificial insemination was probably the least traumatizing part of the whole process of having an offspring in captivity. In the wild, mothers and babies are never separated from their young. They stay by their side forever. I mean, they all live in the pods, and you stay in a close-knit family with your brothers, your sisters, your mom, and your maternal grandmother. Like, that is how it is. It is very close-knit. You stay with them forever. You are a calf in your mother's eyes forever. It's just how that species of animal works. Like, that's just how they are. And SeaWorld actually denies separating mothers and calves and says that they were weaned from their mothers. Now, this is just completely ridiculous because you can't wean an orca from their mother. Another really big part of having kids in the wild is mothers teaching their daughters how to carry a baby, how to take care of a calf, how to take care of themselves after they've had one. And because they were having kids so young in captivity, they were never taught how to take care of young, so they couldn't teach their young how to take care of young. It was essentially like that saying, like, babies having babies. And this would sometimes result into mothers rejecting their calves. Now, in the wild, females typically start having calves anywhere between the ages of 13 and 15, and in captivity, they breed up to as young as 8 years old. So that is very, very young. I mean, that's half the age that you would be having calves in the wild. Plus, in the wild, they have a 4 to 5 year wait period from when they have each calf. It's an 18-month pregnancy, and then they typically nurse their calves for 18 months. So that's 3 years already that they should definitely be waiting to have a kid. And then they usually wait at least 1 or 2 more because it's a difficult process for these animals. They need time to heal, and because of the way that they are emotionally with their pods, they have time with this calf specifically. Now, in captivity, if they wanted you to have a kid, you were going to have a kid. That's just how it was. It didn't matter if you just popped one out. It didn't matter if you were still nursing. It didn't matter if you were too young. If you could physically carry a kid, that's what you were going to do. As of 2015, 19 calves had been separated from their mothers, and only 2 of them were in result to the mother rejecting them. Now, that is the same company who denies separating mothers and calves. In the wild, this is seen to be a traumatizing experience. I think it's the J pod. I'm not entirely sure if that's the correct pod, but I think it's the J pod. They're in the waters near Australia, and they have not successfully had a calf grow into an adult for years. They have no idea why, they just haven't. And it was only a couple years ago, I think, there was a new mother. She had just had her calf, and it did not survive. I think it was only a couple months old, and it carried its calf around on its back for days. Now, these calves aren't that small. They're heavy animals, and to carry them around on her back would have been extremely stressful to try to keep up with the rest of the pod. And she did that for days. days. And that was in the wild when you had the rest of your family. These whales are essentially alone, and they get the only thing they have taken away from them. Another thing I want to touch on is the part of the brain that processes emotions. If you're not aware, like the brain is separated into different parts, and each part kind of controls something. So like the left side of your brain controls the right side of your body, things like that. And the part of the brain that controls emotions in orcas is 3 times the size, like proportionally to a human brain. So that leads scientists believe that they process very, very deep and very heavy emotions, which, I mean, if you think about it, if you think about your child being taken away from you, I mean, you can imagine that pain, even if you've never had to deal with it. Now imagine it, but all of your emotions are heightened. Like, imagine how angry and how traumatizing that would be for you and the calf. I think it was Kasaka and Takara, and when Takara was planned to be moved to a different park, they got her out of the water, they put her on the stretcher, and when they had left the park, Kasaka started just shaking, like uncontrollably shaking in the pool. And all of the other whales would leave her alone, and about like once an hour, all of the other whales would swim up to her, check on her. She wouldn't respond to them at all, and they would swim back, and they would do this every hour. Now, if you're familiar with like how echolocation works, it's a type of communication that basically bounces off sound. Sound bounces off of objects, and you can see how far apart people are from you. Now, this whale was using long-range vocals to try to find her kid. They had never been recorded before in the wild or in captivity, so she was essentially making up long-range vocals to try to hit a sound off of her calf. That's heartbreaking, and SeaWorld just sees no problem with it.
If my animals are happy, they'll breed, they eat, they interact.
Thankfully, on March 17th in 2016, SeaWorld agreed to stop their breeding program, which honestly is a really big win for these animals. I mean, I hope it will prevent a lot of trauma that they could have faced, but just the fact that they had to deal with that at all just makes me so sad, but it is something to be thankful for. It's not going to happen again in captivity, at least with this park. Another thing I wanted to talk about in this video is the amount of accidents and injuries that have been the result of humans being in contact with these whales. Now, even though the ones involving Tilikum, I feel like are definitely the most well known, there's a couple more that I feel like you hear ping-ponging around, but the ones with Tilikum are definitely the ones that are the most known. And they're only 3 out of over 100 incidents. Over 600 pages of reported incidents from when these whales have hurt humans. And that's only the ones that are recorded and reported. I mean, think about all of the ones that are like, oh, you're fine. Just a bruised rib, you're okay. Brush it off. Just a concussion, we're not going to report that one. Like, what? And these trainers were allowed in the water with those animals for that long when there are so many records of people dying from them, but they just put them in because it has a fun show. Like, I just don't understand. I don't understand how this was ever legally allowed. Another death that resulted in a whale was at a park called Laurel Parque, and it was in, I believe it was the Canary Islands, off the coast of Spain, I think. It was a really big tourist attraction. It was a really big park, and they wanted to expand with orcas. Now, this park was basically under the supervision of SeaWorld because all 4 of their orcas were SeaWorld's orcas that they were kind of lenting to them. And all of the trainers who were going to train them, who worked at Laurel Parque, were not experienced whale trainers. They had never been in the water with a whale before, and they essentially just kind of had to guess how to train these whales. And on Christmas Eve of 2009, a SeaWorld whale killed trainer Alexis Martinez. Now, this one is pretty upsetting to me because of the way that it was handled. They originally had called Alexis's girlfriend and told her that he had fallen in, there had been an accident with the whale, and that he was in the hospital and he was going to be fine. That is what they told her when they called her that day. When she arrived at the hospital, they told her that he had drowned and died after they had told her that he was going to be okay. And they basically said that he had fallen into the water, gotten spooked, and couldn't find a way to get out of the water. The autopsy report was not released for months. His entire family was just completely left in the dark. They asked question after question, and he drowned. He drowned. That was the answer to every single one. Basically, they just wanted to shut them up. They were actually allowed to see his body when they went to the hospital, but he was completely covered up except for his head. So if that isn't a red flag that they're trying to cover up some external injuries, I don't know what is. When the autopsy report eventually came back, it showed that he did not drown. He had injury after injury, very similar to Dawn's, very similar to Daniel Duke's, very similar to the trainer in Canada. This whale had killed him out of aggression. The park completely tried to cover it up. SeaWorld completely tried to cover it up. And this was only 2 months before Dawn's death. So SeaWorld, in the span of 2 months, had 2 deaths, and they had the nerve to blame both of them on trainer error. I mean, you're gonna blame humans who are physically so much smaller than these massive animals. These animals weigh tons, and that guy probably weighed 150 pounds, and you're gonna blame it on him? Like, are you kidding me? When they're not even around to defend themselves? I'm sorry, I get fired up. I get so irritated because this company is so big that it has control over all of these other smaller parks, and then this stuff happens and everybody just sweeps it under the rug like it's fine. I'm also going to insert some other clips of just some of the more severe injuries. being said, I'm going to start talking about probably the most famous whale there ever was, named Keiko, who starred in the movie Free Willy. Now, Free Willy was a movie that the Warner Brothers were trying to get up and running for years, and they could not find a whale or a facility to shoot the movie with. Now, obviously, their first choice was SeaWorld. They wanted to film it with one of SeaWorld's whales. They wanted to film it in their facility. And SeaWorld basically told them that they would do this if the ending of the movie was changed to the whale be putting in a better facility, which I just think is so funny because, like, could you imagine if that movie, like that phenomenal movie that has like so much hope in it, ended with the whale being put into just a better facility? Like, that'd be a 45-minute long movie. Keiko has a very, very similar story to Tilikum. He was captured just a few years before Tilikum, right off the coast of Iceland. I think like the first 2 years of his life in captivity weren't recorded. They have no idea where he was at. He was probably at some zoo or marine park in Iceland, but there's no records of it. And then he was sold to Marineland, Ontario in Canada. And again, this was extremely similar to Tilikum's story. He was put in with 5 other whales, and they definitely ganged up on him. He was not a performer. He couldn't learn anything. He had no enthusiasm in performing, and all of these whales were very aggressive with him. So it basically got to the point where they put him in an indoor pool completely alone. He had no fresh air, no sunlight. And let me check how long he was in there. I'm not really sure how long he was in there, but he was eventually sold to a park in Mexico for $300,000. The park was El Nuevo Reno Adventure. I'm gonna butcher it. I'll put the name on the screen if I can figure out how to do it. He was actually put in a dolphin tank with other dolphins, which I think is kind of interesting because I know in the wild there's been like reported dolphin attacks on orcas and orca attacks on dolphins, and yeah, they're from the same family. I just think it's very interesting that they were put in a tank together, and this actually worked very, very well for him. He got along with all of the other dolphins. He tried to start mimicking their echolocation sounds, and yeah, it was going pretty well for him, except for the fact that his tank was just way too small for him, and because it was in Mexico and the tank didn't have a cooling system, the water could get up to 80 degrees. Now, if you're familiar at all with the kind of conditions that whales live in the wild, this is way too hot for them. And this led to a lot of skin diseases, a lot of bacteria growing on their skin, stomach ulcers. It was just all around too warm for him, and it was getting him very, very sick. The park didn't have enough money to build him a new facility and basically needed rid of this whale. They were actually originally going to sell him to SeaWorld because around the same time, SeaWorld was looking for a male whale to spice up their gene pool, and they were going to sell Keiko to SeaWorld for $1.2 million plus $500,000 in transport fees. Now, at this same time, Marineland of the Pacific was also selling a male whale, and they were going to sell him to SeaWorld for $800,000 plus $500,000 in transport fees. Now, that whale was Tilikum, so they definitely got him for a bit of a better price than any other whale, especially since Keiko had a lot of health issues. So, eventually, Warner Brothers came knocking. They saw the conditions that he were living in and was like, this is the perfect place to shoot. It's exactly what we want it to look like. the park was actually going to be shutting down for some serious renovations, so they had plenty of time to shoot, and it was just kind of like a little match made in heaven. And it's actually very interesting because Keiko loved filming, and he would get so excited when he was filming. He cooperated really well. I think they even said like the last day of shooting, they could tell that he knew like something was wrong, and he was like trying to do things to get people to stay. It's actually quite interesting, the part in the movie where the little boy falls into the pool and he brings him up and puts him on the side of the pool. They added that into the movie because it happened with the real whale. One of the workers' kids fell into the pool and he saved them, and they redid that part with the whale. Like, they taught him how to do that. I always thought that part was fake, but it wasn't. They actually did that with the real whale, which is just crazy to me that like Tilikum and Keiko could have had such a similar experience, and just the way that their like minds took it differently. You can just tell their minds are so developed, and they just have so much free will in their personalities, because Tilikum really did have a crazy psychosis, and Keiko just responded to it completely differently. And I just think it's very, very interesting. But anyway, so this movie came out. Obviously SeaWorld wasn't too happy about it. Actually, really no marine park was very happy about it. The park that he was staying at wanted to get him rehabilitated. Warner Brothers was all in on this. The movie actually ended with like the call 1-800 something Free Willy to get more information on it, and it looked like they were going to be able to rehabilitate him. It was going really well for them. All of these animal activists and marine biologists kind of all came together. They were all trying to research where his pod was at, if they could reunite him with his pod. There is some stories of orcas kind of living by themselves if their pod rejects them, or if they get lost or something like that. So he could have survived in the wild by himself, and it really looked like he was gonna get out of his facility. Now, then SeaWorld basically offered the park a better deal and more money if they would help them rehabilitate Keiko and just put him in a better facility, which is how they wanted the movie to end. And it basically turned into this decade-long cat and mouse fight of SeaWorld and all of these animal activist groups offering this park more money, trying to release this whale. And SeaWorld's big argument was, our trainers are sponsors to these whales can never survive in the wild, blah blah blah. And they're like, well, the Navy's released all of their orcas and sea pens have been released, like this, he can be released, like we can do this. So basically the good team won. They rehabilitated him, they released him in Iceland, and he immediately swam for Norway. He was released in July of 2002, and he contracted pneumonia in December of 2003. So he had only been in the wild for a year and a half. And I feel like this kind of stunted rehabilitating animals, because it gave people the belief that these animals loved people and they need people, and he was trying to go find people, and that's why he got pneumonia, blah blah blah. And it's like, this is just one case, and there are so many whales out there that never got their chance. And he lived a pretty crap bag life, if I'm gonna be honest, and at least he got a year and a half to do whatever he wanted to do in the ocean. Like, he got to swim more miles in that year and a half than he probably did his entire life. And it just sucks that this cost so much money, because in the end, like, I really do think even if these whales only survive a year or two in the wild, I truly do think that that's better than captivity. I mean, yes, their trainers love them, but I just don't think in this situation that love is enough for these animals. Like, you can't love these animals to freedom. You can't love these animals back to their families. One of the big talks for rehabilitating animals is sea pods, and I mentioned that a little bit earlier. And sea pods are basically just kind of like enclosures. It would be like an enclosure off of a little island that these orcas can swim in capture their own food, live in the ocean, and if they're doing well, they can be released back into the wild. Now, the one thing that just doesn't work with these is, if you remember at the very, very beginning of part 1 of these little videos, I said about how there were 2 main groupings of whales, ones who lived in the northern hemisphere and ones who lived in the southern hemisphere. Now, scientists have tracked multiple whales going through their past throughout the year, and they have no record of those whales ever coming into contact with each other. So they can essentially assume that those whales don't know the other kind of species, that's not the correct word, but you guys know what I mean, even exists. Now, because of artificial insemination, these whales are breeded from different species, from different pods, from different families, and if they're released back into the wild, they have no place to go. And I mean, I'm not a scientist, so maybe there is way more benefits of releasing them than there is being in the wild. Anyway, what I wanted to end this video talking about is SeaWorld and other marine parks can no longer capture whales from the wild, and they can't breed anymore. So essentially the 30-some whales that SeaWorld's got in captivity, the whales in captivity right now is all of the ones, the orcas in captivity are all of the ones that are going to be in captivity forever. They have no other way to get them. But those rules only apply to orcas. I'm sorry, I feel like I sound really cheerful. I'm not trying to sound cheerful, this isn't happy, but the most likely victim of these corporations are beluga whales. Now, beluga whales are the perfect mold for the next big show of these marine parks. They're extremely cute, they're pretty friendly, and they're really, really smart. So I definitely feel like unless permanent laws get put into place saying that no whales and dolphins can be in captivity, belugas are definitely gonna be like the next big thing. Actually, in 2018, in Russia, 11 orcas and 86 belugas were found freezing to death in these little pods. They had been all captured over the course of months, and they weren't going anywhere, and they were all freezing. And I feel like that really just shows that as long as they're allowed to be in captivity, people are going to find a way, and this definitely shows that belugas are definitely going to be the next ones that whalers and companies like this are going to go after. However, I don't know what happened to these animals. I mean, there was almost 100 of them, and I remember when the story like first came out, I would see like an update every day on like how many had died and what they were trying to do, and then it was just like nothing. So I don't know if they just let them die in there. I don't know if they tried to rehabilitate them and release them. I don't know if they killed them. I have no idea what happened to them, but I definitely do feel like that's gonna be the next animal that's gonna be like the big stuffed animal movie Shamu kind of thing. I'm sorry if this video was all over the place. It was definitely pretty relaxed. I definitely kind of moved in and out of the camera a bit, and I'm sure that was kind of annoying, but if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!